views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
This is Patty Hunter, Patty's Page. My guest star, as we can see here on Zoom, is David Bereit.
Thank you, Patty. It's such an honor to be here. I'm excited to do this.
We've been doing this for 15 years, kid. 15 years.
It's amazing.
David,
So you were 5 years old when you started, right? So you're now 20.
Hey,
Is that?
I love
that's
you
it.
already.
There we go.
Where were you born and raised, Dave?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was raised there up through high school. So I was blessed to be raised in a wonderful Christian home. My parents loved the Lord. They loved each other. They loved my brother and I had a really great upbringing there. It was a really wonderful place to grow up. And it was right before my senior year in high school that my dad pulled me aside at Boy Scout summer camp. And he said, I just wanted to let you know I'm getting transferred to Texas. So that was what moved me from Pennsylvania down to Texas. But it was a wonderful upbringing, and had a brother, an older brother, my brother Mark, and my mom and dad. And we had a great family upbringing and a lot of time together as a family. And it was really a gift. I'm very thankful for where I come from.
So have you been pro-life all your life, or just when?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is no. I was not pro-abortion, but for much of my upbringing, I never realized that abortion was even happening. And so growing up in this home, I didn't know what abortion was. I didn't know that people were having abortions. It was never preached about in my little Presbyterian church growing up. We never talked about it in our home. So I was, I guess what you'd describe, Patty, as blissfully unaware. I didn't even realize it was happening. So what happened that led me to get involved in the pro-life movement was when my dad got transferred to Texas. I moved from Pittsburgh down to the Bible Belt, and I was suddenly there thrust into an environment with many evangelical Christians, many Protestant Christians, many Catholic Christians, and they really helped me to bring my faith to life. And they helped me to understand that the gospel message of 2,000 years ago is just as relevant to the challenges that we face today. But it was there in Texas that for the first time I began to realize what abortion was. I understood the personhood, the humanity of the child in the womb, but the fact that there were lives that were being destroyed, children were dying, women were being wounded. That's where I first became aware of it. And it really burdened my heart. I was very saddened by this, but even then, once I became aware, I didn't become active because I thought, well, this doesn't affect me. This is affecting other people. And so I became what I would today call a passive pro-lifer. Oh, I don't like abortion, but I didn't want to do anything about it. But all of that began to change when in 1998, I was living in College Station, Texas, the home of Texas A&M, where I went to school. And I had met and married my wife, Margaret, my best friend of my life. And the news broke in our town that Planned Parenthood was going to open the first ever abortion center in College Station, Texas. And that was when the light went on and I realized there's this thing that's really bad. Children die, women are wounded, and it's about to happen where I live. And I suddenly felt a sense of responsibility that I need to do something. I still didn't know what, but I felt the need to do something. So what began to happen, Patty, was My wife, who had grown up in a wonderful pro-life Catholic family in Corpus Christi, Texas, she had always told me about going out and praying outside abortion facilities, and she had talked about being a part of pro-life efforts. But since we were living in a town prior to this news of Planned Parenthood opening the abortion center where there wasn't an abortion clinic, I thought I don't have to do anything. But I still heard those stories she talked about and thought, yikes, that's a lot to have to do, to go out and do something about it. So when this news broke that Planned Parenthood was going to open this abortion center, Margaret said to me, David, we need to do something about this. And there was a meeting that was held at a local church where a young woman named Lauren, who was a church secretary, she felt led to invite people to come together and say, what can we do to try to stop this? And we all gathered in that church for that first meeting. And Patty, it was there for the first time that I felt God clearly calling me to get involved actively, not passively, but actively. And that's where my pro-life convictions went from non-existent growing up to passive before that to finally a sense of I've got to be in action, doing something to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, innocent children in the womb and their mothers.
You started a grassroots organization. What was it called?
It was called the Coalition for Life, and I was only a part of starting that. So that young church secretary that I mentioned a few moments ago, her name was Lauren. Lauren was the one who called not only that meeting that my wife dragged me to somewhat reluctantly, but also she was the one who said, we need to start a group to try to counter what Planned Parenthood is doing. And she had received guidance from people like Jim Sedlak, God rest his soul, who had founded Stop Planned Parenthood, and people like Brian Gibson of the Pro-Life Action Ministries in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and other, Father Paul Marks, Human Life International, many others. But Lauren said, we need to start something. And so she recruited a group of us to help found this organization called, initially it was the Brazos Valley, because that was the geographic region, the Brazos Valley Coalition for Life. Eventually we just shortened it to Coalition for Life. But that was the organization that was formed in 1998. And its initial thrust was attempting to stop Planned Parenthood from opening its abortion center. But when regrettably that failed to happen, the stopping of it and the abortion center did open, then the shift of the focus was, how do we now try to help protect babies? How do we try to help protect mothers? How do we help to end abortion where we live? And it was during that season where the shift of the organization happened that I felt this growing sense of, I was volunteering, I was serving on the board of directors, but I kept feeling this sense over those 2 or 3 years of I need to do more. And I think the person listening to us right now probably has at some point experienced that, or maybe they're experiencing it today as they're listening to you and me talk, Patty. But I felt that need to do more. And so from 1998 to 2001, that was kind of my process of getting more and more involved. But in 2001, there was another wake-up call for me. So 1998 was to get involved, and I got more and more involved. But in 2001, the abortion clinic was open. Children were dying. Women were being wounded. The abortion numbers were going up. The number of people involved in local pro-life efforts was going down. The donations to local pro-life efforts were going down. And I had this sense of conviction that we, me and others, needed to do more to be that voice for the voiceless. And so it was during that year of 2001 that as I was wrestling with all of this, there was a profound day. It was June 26, 2001. I'll never forget that day for the rest of my life. I was at the time a pharmaceutical sales rep. So that was what I was doing professionally. I was calling on doctors selling medicines. And my cell phone rang, and it was my friend Lauren. She called me and she said, hey, David, I wanted to let you know, the one who started the Coalition for Life. She said, I wanted to let you know, Planned Parenthood aborted 10 more children today. But Patty, I knew that we weren't doing enough. I knew there were things that we could do to stop this bloodshed, to stop this injustice that we weren't doing. And so I said to Lauren on June 26, 2001, I said, you know what, maybe what I'm supposed to do is quit my job in the business world and dive in full force and do everything I can to try to stop this. Now, I was just talking out loud, but Lauren on the other end of the phone, she said, well, David, maybe you should do that. And then she shared with me that she had had a child, and I knew that, but she was wanting to stay at home and be a mom, and she was looking for somebody to lead that local Coalition for Life group. And she said, maybe God is asking you to step in and do that. And that was when there was both a light that went off, like an illumination that I was supposed to do it, but also there was terror because I didn't think I could do it. I didn't know if I would be able. I didn't think I had the skills and the experiences and everything else that was needed. But when I thought about those children who were perishing, I thought about those women who were being hurt, I said, I've got to try. I went home and talked with my wife and we prayed about it. And 2 weeks later, I quit my job and I dove in to lead that group, the Coalition for Life. And that was the beginning of my full-time involvement in pro-life efforts.
This world is a death culture world.
It is.
We got to get ourselves through education, you might say, and love and compassion. No violence, peaceful.
Amen.
So, how many churches are working with you, dear?
How many churches? In that case, that Coalition for Life, we ended up recruiting 60 churches to engage with us in that town. And so we reached out. It was kind of an interesting way we did this. At the time, I was kind of coming from my background in Protestant and evangelical Christianity. I had married a Catholic Christian, but at that point, the most involved churches in our community were the Catholic churches. And so we started there. There were 6 churches in our deanery, in our community. And so I went around to the different pastors of those churches, and each of them invited me to come in and speak after their masses to invite people to get involved in local pro-life efforts. So what I had been encouraged to do by Jim Sedlak from Stop Planned Parenthood was to form a peaceful presence, a protest, a demonstration. We chose to do it as a prayer vigil outside of Planned Parenthood. And he had said, the more hours, the more days you can do that, the more lives will be saved because some people will just not go in when people are gathered outside. So my pitch to these churches was come out and pray for an hour and collectively as a church for a half day or for a day, and we will offer hope and help to those at risk of going in and having an abortion. So the 6 churches allowed me to come in. We recruited a few hundred people. They started coming out. And then I started going next to some of the more evangelical in nature churches that were very actively involved in pro-life. So Baptist churches, charismatic churches, some mainline Protestant churches as well.
Right.
And I just kept reaching out. Some got more involved, some were less involved, but collectively, those 60 churches, we ended up recruiting more than 5,000 people into our local efforts. Some of those people doing a lot, some of those people doing a little, but collectively it started to build a momentum where people in our community started to look around and say, the church is waking up. They are becoming the salt and light that they're meant to be. And Patty, it was fascinating because what people started telling me as they saw more and more people getting engaged and involved in the pro-life movement was they said, I realize it's not a matter of if abortion will end in our community, it's a matter of when. And that was the mind shift that we saw happen. People began to say, we can end this injustice for once and for all. And even during that period of time, it was fascinating. At that point, the president nationally of Planned Parenthood was Gloria Felt. And she came into town to do a fundraiser for our local Planned Parenthood abortion center because they felt like they were under siege and their business was going down because of all the pro-life efforts. At that event, Gloria Felt, the president of Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion chain in the country, was telling the people assembled there that if this facility closes, well, we've got other ones further down the road. But she conceded and saw the defeat that was on the horizon. We knew it was a matter of time, prayer, persistence, and that with the body of Christ, the many different parts working together, we could end this. And that's the message that I want the person who's watching or listening to us right now to take away. God will use you to help transform your community, to rally other people, and to bring an end to this injustice for once and for all if you hear and answer his call, and if you involve others in it. Together, you can bring an end to abortion where you live.
So do you do this communicating with everybody via workshops or touring or spreading the word on TV or radio?
Yeah.
How do you?
We used every means we could. So this was back when the internet was nowhere near what it was today. We didn't have Zoom like you and I are talking on right now. But what we did was, first of all, we created a database of people. So everybody we knew, we had their name, we had their mailing address, we had their phone number, and we could still call people, and we still can today, to actually talk to them. We would gather with them at meetings at churches. We would have community rallies and those sorts of things. But also in the early days of kind of the growth and expansion of the internet, I saw the enormous power and potential of email and realized that if people would sign up to our email list, we could communicate from one to many people at one time. And so we did everything we could to try to get people to sign up for email. And over time, that list grew to thousands and thousands of people, so that when we needed to rally people, perhaps Planned Parenthood was holding a fundraiser, we needed to protest, perhaps we needed to get a lot of people to come out and pray at the abortion center, we could send one email to many people, and some of those people would respond, and it was a rapid turnaround. So websites, emails, and then over time, one of the early technologies before we had Zoom and webinars and webcasts was we started to see the power of even conference calls, where you could get a bunch of people on a big conference phone call at one time. And so it was not so much what was the technology as it was what is our desire. Our desire is to take the message of life and to take the message of what each of us can do and share it with as many people as we can with whatever technology is available to us. And here you are, Patty. You utilize Zoom, you utilize video, you utilize email, you utilize all these other tools to get this message out to others. And for the person watching or listening to us to say, what technologies? Is it a social media platform? Is it YouTube videos? Is it a podcast? What can I do to get a message out to more people? And that technology will change over time. But the principle never changes of how do we get more people excited, get them inspired, and then get them involved in our various pro-life efforts and utilize every tool we have at our resource and master a few of those and utilize all the other ones to the best of the ability we can.
This is called education.
Amen.
Reaching out, sharing, networking. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And Planned Parenthood is pure evil after our children. They're in our schools, younger kids' schools, and we're trying to get them out.
That's right.
We have a Planned Parenthood here in Fort Wayne, and you, sir, wrote a book. You did that how long ago, dear?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think it was on the 40th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, if I remember. So what would that be? 2012 probably was when that book came out. So like 12 years ago, something like that?
2013, I think.
2013. Okay. You have it in front of you, so you could find that out. And
with Cindy Lambert, you wrote it. Now, what's in the book for people to
Yeah. So the book is a culmination of what I had learned up to that point in 40 Days for Life. And I'll add one little piece of the story that will then set the stage for talking about the book. So we were doing this local pro-life effort, the Coalition for Life. We were rallying people, educating them, communicating with them. But there was a point where we realized we needed something more. We needed a central rallying point for people. And my staff, I pulled them together around our wooden table in our office, and I said, we've got to think of something else that we can do because the abortion numbers were still going up. We still needed to rally people. And through an hour of prayer, what God put on our hearts was the time frame that's in the title of that book, 40 days. A very spiritually significant time frame that God has used throughout history to bring about transformation and to test the faithfulness of his people. We felt we were being tested. We wanted to see transformation. So we said, okay, what could we do for 40 days? Well, the first thing we felt we had to do was pray and fast because we felt and believed to the core of our being, this is a spiritual battle first and foremost. Yes, there are physical consequences as children die, as women are wounded. But at the bottom line of this, it's a good versus evil, heaven versus hell struggle. So we needed to pray because with God, all things are possible. And also we felt led to fast for 40 days because we're told in scripture, some demons can only be driven out through prayer and fasting. So with that foundation of prayer and fasting, secondarily, we felt led to go out and hold a 24-hour-a-day, 40-day-long prayer vigil outside of Planned Parenthood. So building on what we had already done, but doing it 24 hours a day with more people, and then rallying and going out to all of our community and inviting people to be a part of the solution. So when we did that first 40 Days for Life campaign in the fall of 2004, 20 years ago, that exploded, and we had over 1,000 people get involved, and abortions went down in our town by 28%. So we finished those 40 days thanking God for what he had done, exhausted, and other cities started reaching out and saying, can you help us? We'd like to do what you did. And so we began helping one-off towns. And then in 2007, we started organizing nationally coordinated and eventually internationally coordinated 40 Days for Life campaigns where people would pray and fast, peaceful vigil, community outreach for 40 days. And we saw abortions going down all across the country and eventually around the world. So the book that you're talking about was about, let's see, from 2007 to 2012, about 6 years in 2013, it was a culmination of 40 different stories of how God showed up and used ordinary people to achieve extraordinary life-saving impact in their towns. From not only College Station, Texas, to places like Fort Wayne, Indiana, to places like in the middle of the country, the Republic of Georgia, and to places like Fargo, North Dakota. And it's stories of how each of us, when we answer God's call and put our faith into action, we can be a part of the solution. So Cindy Lambert was a former vice president at Zondervan. She fell in love with the idea of 40 Days for Life. And so we collaborated with her. She helped us to pull these 40 stories together and tell them. And in that book, I'll just share this, there are a couple of stories that are profound and transformational. One of them is called 72 Ransom. And it's a story of when I went right before 40 Days for Life began to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I was given a tour of a former abortion center that had been built inside of a former church and eventually went out of business days after the abortionist was driven out. And the spiritual transformation that happened there was profound, and I share some of that experience. Another story that's profound in there is the story of a friend of mine, David Bereit. And David was a guy who, a few nights before that hour of prayer at the wooden table that I described to you, Patty, had come to my house and shared with me that his heart was broken about abortion, and he really felt we needed to go out and do something more. And he was the one whose idea of the 40 days and the being out in front of the facility 24 hours a day, we brought into what became 40 Days for Life.
Right.
Only years later did I find out that David himself, the guy whose idea helped to spark 40 Days for Life, had himself almost been aborted as a baby. And when he discovered this as an adult man, it broke his heart and made him say, what can I do to help make sure that others don't succumb to what I almost died from? And that really helped to birth 40 Days for Life. So the book is beautiful, lots of beautiful stories, but most importantly for the person who reads it, same person who's talking, listening to us talk right now, it's an invitation for you to say, what can I do? Children are still dying. Ever since Roe versus Wade was overturned, right now abortions are still happening in various different ways all across the country. We need to be more engaged than ever before. More women are at risk, more children are at risk, and each of us have a call to answer for such a time as this.
This will be shown after the election. So what do you predict for the future for our children, our families? What do you see changing in front of you?
Well, I'll kind of take it from the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. We all celebrated it as a major step. I think some people thought it would take us further than it did because it didn't ban abortion. It didn't say abortion is bad. It simply said it's not in the Constitution and therefore this is an issue for the states. And so it's been back on these state ballots. And prior to the 2024 election, the pro-life movement has lost every one of these ballot initiatives. We've got 10 this year, and we're praying that some of these will be victorious, if not all of them. But it's an uphill battle because we had this backlash of people who were desperate to cling to abortion, to live the lives they wanted to lead, and thinking that abortion would get them out of their behavior patterns without consequences, even though we know that's not true. So where do I think, what is the future? I think the short-term future is we need to be more engaged locally and at the state level than we ever have been before. Yes, we still have some things that can be done at the federal level. There are things that Congress can do. There are things that a president can do. But really, the biggest transformation that can happen is right in our backyards and right in our individual home states. So we need to be more active, we need to be more involved, and we need to work to form stronger coalitions across our states and then work collaboratively with other states that border us. Because even in states like Texas, where abortion is, as of now, largely restricted and prohibited, people are flooding across the borders to New Mexico. New Mexico went from 5 abortion centers to 15 within a month or two after the Dobbs decision. So we have to be able to work across those borders and still solidify what happens in our states. But Patty, the other thing that I predict, it's critically important more than ever before, is each of us saying, how can I help that person who is facing an unexpected pregnancy and walk with them in the messiness of their real life difficult situation? So that means being involved in our pregnancy help centers. That means being involved in maternity ministries. I'm on the board of a maternity ministry. My wife volunteers for maternity ministry. We support numerous pregnancy centers. We, as people who recognize the dignity, the beauty, the worth of human life, have to be willing to say, I will help you to a mother facing an unexpected pregnancy, walk with her throughout that pregnancy, and then when she gives birth to a beautiful baby, be willing to support and help her on that journey. And I have this picture on my desk just to remind me, this is a little boy named Jakai. He's actually no longer a little boy, he's a teenager.
Oh, boy.
But Patty, when I had been involved in 40 Days for Life for 2.5 years, I had not met a single baby that had been saved through these efforts. I'd heard stories, I'd seen pictures, I hadn't met one. But I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, speaking at a pregnancy center, going out the next day to the 40 Days for Life vigil, and a mother got up to share her story about how she had been walking in the door of the Harrisburg abortion center when she looked out to the street and she saw a woman there with a sign that said, "My abortion hurt me." That woman's name was Karen, and Karen was post-abortive, and Karen was there offering hope so that somebody else wouldn't go through the pain that she had gone through. And that woman saw that sign, she saw Karen, and Karen said, "I will help you." The mother closed the door, ran over to Karen, tears streaming down her face. Karen took her to the local pregnancy center, and she chose life. And Karen and those other pregnancy center volunteers were with her throughout the pregnancy, even after this little boy, Jakai, was born. And I met him that night at that pregnancy center event.
Yes.
And I was just in Pennsylvania speaking at the Pennsylvania March for Life. I shared this story because I was in Harrisburg. And at the end, Karen came out of the crowd. I didn't even know she was there, who had had the "My Abortion Hurt Me" sign. She came over to me and she pulled up a picture and she said, "I was just at Jakai's 13th birthday party with him and his mother." And I just thought, Patty, what we do today, walking with women, saving children, not only saves the life of a baby right now, but these are children who are going to grow up and they're going to change their world for good. That's the opportunity, that's the obligation I believe each of us has in responding to this crisis now and in the future. You know, I look at you, Patty, I look at so many others who have been involved so much longer than me, and I am so thankful because each of us get to stand on the shoulders of giants, those who've gone before us. Some who are still here, others who, like Joe Scheidler, Jim Sedlak, Nellie Gray, some of the greats that have gone before us, Jack Wilkie and others who have gone home to be with the Lord. But I feel that we can look to you and say, what does it mean to be faithful over a long period of time in being that voice for those who have no voice? And Patty, you've been a great example of that, as have so many others, not only in Fort Wayne, across Indiana, and across the country. But for each of us to look to you and to say, what can we learn from your example? And I think a word that I would lean upon for each of us is to be steadfast, to never, ever, ever give up, because the cause that we're involved in is just, it's right, and we need to follow the example of you and others who have gone before us as we pursue justice for children and for their mothers. Patty, thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I will come back, and as I've been with you before, I will be with you again. And just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your faithfulness And to the person who's watching and listening, thank you for taking the time to listen to what we have to share today. And may God bless you. May God guide you and help you to become a change agent, a voice for those who have no voice, and help to save lives, change the course of history, and build God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven.
Thank you. And we'll see you next week, people. Thank you for tuning into the show. And we thank you, David Bereit, one of my favorite people.
Thank you, Patty.
Godspeed.